Hello dear students, this is lecture number 3, part 1 of 2 in the course Cultural Studies level 7. The title of the lecture is Raymond Williams, one of the founders of the discipline of Cultural Studies. Of course, as you see his dates, 1921, 1988. So Raymond Williams was a contemporary of Richard Hoggart that we have studied in the last lecture. The two share the fact of being British and of being Marxist and of having been pioneers or founders of the discipline of cultural studies. And as you see, they both belong to England. That's why cultural studies is usually seen as a mainly British discipline that extended all over the world from Britain. You see that he's not just a theorist or an academician, but he's also a novelist. He has written a number of novels. We will talk about them later. And the novels are not just for entertainment, they are part of what we can call propaganda literature or literature that serves to explain a certain philosophy or certain concepts that are of special interest to a committed socialist like Raymond Williams. So today we are talking about Raymond Williams, a 20th century British Marxist theorist, academician, novelist, and cultural critic. Before talking about his birth and early background and education and his experience during the war, all these are of course shaping influences, let us focus on one of the most famous books in the field of cultural studies and also Raymond's major book, Raymond Williams' major book. It is Culture and Society. Culture and Society was first published in 1958. So again, you see, it was part of this flourishing of writing about culture that happened in Britain in the aftermath of the Second World War and in the decades of the 1950s and 60s, in which theorists were trying to study culture from its different aspects and how it is related to society in general, how it is related to power and to politics and so on. So you have to remember that Culture and Society is an important book, not just in the career of Raymond Williams, but in cultural studies in general. And one of the important things that we have in this book is that it gives us a tracing of the development of the notion of culture in Great Britain as well as Europe over a period of 2 centuries or more, from the 18th century to the 20th century. We have mentioned before that if you are doing theoretical work, if someone is a theorist, this job or this task of being a theorist, it includes things like tracing how the definition of a certain term or concept changes across time, that it was used to mean one thing and then after some time the meaning changed and so on. So here, since Raymond Williams is a cultural critic, it is not a surprise that in his major work, Culture and Society, he wants to put a solid definition for the term culture. Everybody is using culture. And he wanted to say that this term culture was not always used with the meaning that we have now, not always with the contemporary meaning that we have now. For example, it was initially used in the term agriculture. Culture was just part of this word agriculture, which of course, as you know, refers to the tending of natural growth like plants and field crops, and it has to do with farming and with agricultural societies or with this economic activity of agriculture. So this was its main use in the 18th century. Then, when the Industrial Revolution happened, and you know that Great Britain was one of the countries that was a pioneer in the Industrial Revolution when compared to other European countries, the Industrial Revolution can be thought to have happened in Britain in the 18th century. This mechanical progress initiated by the Industrial Revolution, it caused the term culture not to be used just in reference to agriculture, but it started having a wider meaning. It started moving to other spheres. For example, it was used to refer to human development and to the upbringing of children. If you are a parent, father or mother, and you have children and you are responsible for their welfare and upbringing, this welfare and upbringing, it has a physical side. You want them to be healthy, to have healthy, strong bodies, to eat well and not to suffer from any disease. But at the same time, this upbringing has intellectual aspects, moral aspects, artistic aspects. So the word culture was used to refer to human development and child upbringing when it comes to the intellectual, moral, and artistic development of children. And according to Raymond Williams, this change in the sphere of the meaning of the term culture from agriculture to human development happened as a response to the mechanical progress that happened in the Industrial Revolution. People started thinking that now we are having machines, and the machines can do the physical labor in better and more efficient ways than humans. But we as humans will always have the upper hand when it comes to moral sides or artistic or intellectual parts of our development. So this part was related to a human response to the Industrial Revolution. Now, before leaving this slide, which is mainly about the major book of culture and society, let us talk a bit about Raymond Williams' major focus of interest. Williams was always interested in the relationship between language, literature, and society. Now, he always considered culture, one of his favorite definitions of culture is that culture means, or culture is, a realized signifying system. I am sure that you are familiar with the word signifying from your linguistics courses. You are familiar that language in general is a system of signification, or it is a signifying system. And Williams, he used this to refer to culture. It is a signifying system, but a realized one, which means it is realized in the real world. It is not just a signifying system like the verbal signs of language, but it is realized. We see it in the real world. We see it in the religious ceremonies, in the dresses of people, in the books, in the operas they attend, in the food they eat, in whatever. So it is a realized signifying system. This is a favorite definition of culture to Raymond Williams. And as we said, it arises from his interest in three things that he saw always as interlinked. Language, this is number one, literature is number two, and society, number three. Also, let us always remember that Williams was a committed socialist. He did not just believe in Marxism or socialism, just as like when you say, I believe in something and you are not doing anything practical about it. No, he was a committed socialist, and we will talk about this aspect of his character more in coming parts. But remember that he was a committed socialist, and because of this, he considered his approach to cultural studies to be a sort of cultural materialism. So again, I want you to remember the term cultural materialism. Cultural materialism, this is the approach to cultural studies adopted by Raymond Williams. It is almost a theory on its own, cultural materialism. This is the way that Raymond Williams behaved toward cultural studies. This is the definitions he was giving and the writings he was doing. He was explaining cultural studies in such a way that reflected his commitment to socialism, and that is why it is called cultural materialism, because of course materialism is an integral part of the Marxist theory. So now we are about to leave this very important slide. Let me try to wrap it up very quickly. That in this slide we discussed the major work of Raymond Williams, Culture and Society, a book that was first published in 1958 and remains highly relevant in the field of cultural studies up till now. In this book, he was tracing the changes in the definition of culture in Great Britain and Europe over a period from the 18th to the 20th century, and the changes that happened were, according to Williams, a response to the Industrial Revolution and to the mechanic progress that happened, and how humans wanted to be special so as to be able to meet the challenge of the increased mechanization and the increased shall we say replacement of human physical effort by the machine. We also mentioned the term cultural materialism, which is the theory or the approach of cultural studies that was adopted by Raymond Williams. It is an approach that studies culture as a realized system of signification, and it is an approach, of course, that reflects his commitment to socialism. Now, in this slide, we are going to discuss the formative factors, the familial, educational, and World War II background that influenced Williams's work. The work that we were talking about in the first slide, it had its roots in the fact that he belonged to a working class family. He was born shortly after the First World War. He was born in 1921 in a small village in Wales. So he is a Welsh, and by the way, he's a very patriotic Welsh and committed Welsh man. He was born in a village in Wales, and most of the men of the village, including his father, were railway workers, and they always voted for the Labour Party. So as you see, the whole environment was a working class environment. Railway workers voting for the Labour Party in the elections, and so on. Now, Raymond Williams, as a child, attended local schools, and During his teens, Europe in general was witnessing many major political events and unrests, and there was always the threat of war. For example, the rise of Nazism was taking place in Germany. The rise of Nazism and Adolf Hitler, this was happening when Raymond Williams was still a teenager. Also, the breaking out of the Spanish Civil War against the dictator, General Franco. And maybe someone will say, okay, but a teenager who is living in a Welsh village, maybe he will not be very much aware of such major things, especially that this was still the first part of the 20th century, or the first half, it was during the 1930s, and we still didn't have television, and the communications were not that good as today. And if you are asking yourself this question, how would this Welsh teenage boy in a remote Welsh village be aware or conscious of these major events? Let me tell you that we are not dealing with an ordinary teenager. Let me tell you that Raymond Williams had a very early political consciousness. As a boy, he joined what was called the local left book club. And of course, you know that by the term left, we always refer to Marxist or socialist or communist. So there was a book club, and you could join this book club in the village of Raymond Williams, and this would help you to read. It would increase your information. But this book club in particular, this book club that encouraged reading and education among the youth of Raymond Williams's village, was a left book club. It was one of the branches of the Communist Party. And at the young age of 16, when Raymond Williams was just 16, he traveled to Geneva to attend a youth conference of the League of Nations. This was exactly in the year 1937, which means that Williams was a young man of 16 years old, okay? Of course, the League of Nations is this political organization that would develop to become the United Nations, you know now. So he attended this conference. And the attending of the conference was an important event in his life, and an important step in the development of his political consciousness even more. Because while on his way back from Geneva to England, he visited Paris. He passed by Paris and he visited Paris. And he attended one of the international exhibitions of the Soviet Union. This exhibition was currently launched in Paris at that time. Not only attending the Soviet Union exhibition, the young Raymond Williams bought himself a copy of Karl Marx's famous book, The Manifesto, which of course is the book that explains the main tenets of the philosophy of communism. So you can see for yourself that his upbringing and his education and his extracurricular activities helped him to gain a precocious political consciousness and socialist commitment. And this is the same man who will grow up to write the book about culture and society. Well, he joined Cambridge. He studied at Cambridge. His university education was in Cambridge, but this education was interrupted when the Second World War broke out, and he joined the military during the period of the war. He was even taken as an officer because they discovered that he had leadership qualities and so on. And his war experience was so influential, it left him a permanent legacy of respect to first-hand experience. Many, many years later, towards the end of, near the end of his life, he was always saying that when the television talk shows invites so-called experts to talk about this or that war, and these experts start analyzing and commenting and giving their views, Raymond Williams says that all these views, they do not mean anything unless you have had a first-hand experience of the war, because only then you would know how to comment on it and how to try to understand what is really happening. Of course, he was saying that certain things about the war experience cannot be communicated in words. They are only to be experienced firsthand. And he was talking about television as the culture of distance, in which people staying at home in their living rooms try to get an idea about a war through listening to an expert sitting in a studio without really having first-hand experience. He said that this is never sufficient. This is never enough to give a full idea about the chaos and the atrocities and the tragedy of war. After the end of the war, the Second World War, Raymond Williams returned and continued. He picked up where he left his education at Cambridge, and he graduated from Cambridge and got an MA. And then throughout his career, he worked in various teaching and journalistic jobs. Of special importance to him was his experience at adult education. It was a very informing experience to him, adult education. And he also taught at Cambridge, and he was a book reviewer for many of the major publishing houses and newspapers, of course, in addition to his own authorship activity, the many books that he wrote. Politically, he joined the Communist Party while he was a student at Cambridge, and he was an active member of the party. Several times, the party gave him the task of writing party pamphlets because of his skill with words, and this is why he was always interested, as we said, in the language between, in the relation, between language, literature, society, because of course the joining of the Communist Party would be a part of his wider social or political activities. Thus, you can see that we are dealing with a theorist, cultural critic, academician, who has a very extended practical experience on the ground, as we say. Whether the practical experience of being an active member of the Communist Party, not just as an adult, but even since the early age, since his membership of the Left Book Club at his Wales village and his attendance of the Geneva Youth Conference and his reading of Marx, up till the writing of the pamphlets for the party and the choice of the term cultural materialism to denote his approach to cultural studies. Now we come to the end of this part of the lecture. Thank you. And we have another part still talking about Raymond Williams in the coming lecture. Good luck.